I always believed that trust was something you built slowly over time, like a house made of bricks, layer after layer, solid and secure. I had a job I loved, a home that felt safe, and a marriage that, at least on the surface, looked picture perfect. But looking back now, I realize how one unexpected moment, one single person, can change everything. And in my case, it was someone I never would have suspected, my own intern. It started like any ordinary day. I was swamped with deadlines at work, and our department had just brought in a new intern to help lighten the load. She was polite, eager to learn, and honestly, barely noticeable in the beginning. Just another fresh face among many. I remember thinking how young and inexperienced she looked, someone who had no clue how complicated real life could be. I never thought she would be the reason my entire world would start to slip out from under me. My wife and I had been going through a rough patch. We weren't fighting, exactly, but there was distance. We blamed it on work, stress, schedules, everything but ourselves. I thought we were just in a phase, something all couples went through. I didn't know back then how easy it would be for someone to slip through that gap when neither of us was paying attention. And I certainly didn't expect that someone to be a young intern who had just walked into my office. At first, it was small things. A longer conversation during lunch. A casual compliment that felt a bit too personal. I told myself it was harmless, that I was just imagining things. But there's a fine line between professional and personal, and sometimes that line blurs before you even realize it's happening. I didn't see the signs, or maybe I did, but I didn't want to admit that something dangerous was unfolding right in front of me. The weird part is, it wasn't even about attraction. Not at first. It was about attention. About feeling seen again. Heard. Valued. And she knew exactly how to give that kind of attention, in just the right ways. I started staying a little later at work. I told myself it was because of the deadlines. But the truth was, I was chasing a feeling that had quietly disappeared from my home life. What I didn't know was that my wife had started noticing the changes. The late nights. The shifts in my behavior. And while I was convincing myself that nothing was actually happening, something much deeper was already breaking apart. Everything came to a head one rainy Thursday afternoon, when she showed up at my house. The intern. Uninvited. With a look on her face that I still can't get out of my mind. That was the moment I knew nothing would ever be the same again. But what she said next changed everything. I froze when I saw her standing at the door, soaked from the rain. For a second, I thought I was imagining things. My intern, outside my house, on a weekday afternoon, looking nervous, eyes darting like she was being watched. I hadn't told her where I lived. I never shared that kind of personal detail. So how did she know? Before I could even ask, she stepped in without waiting for an invitation. My heart was racing. I could hear the sound of my wife upstairs, completely unaware that a stranger had just entered our home with an energy that felt anything but normal. She looked around like she was checking to see if we were alone. Her voice shook as she said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to go." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't just confused, I was scared. Something was off. This wasn't about work anymore. It felt personal, way too personal. I tried to stay calm, to keep my voice steady, but inside, every alarm bell in my head was going off. She kept saying she needed to talk, that something had happened. Her hands were trembling, and she kept glancing at the stairs like she was afraid someone else might hear. I wanted to ask her to leave, to end this before it got worse, but part of me needed to understand what was really going on. Why was she there? What did she mean by not having anywhere else to go? The more she talked in circles, the more I felt like I had stepped into something far bigger than I ever intended. And then she said something that made my stomach drop. She mentioned my wife, by name. I hadn't told her anything about my marriage. That wasn't something we ever discussed at the office. But she said it so casually, like she'd known all along. I felt a chill go through me. How much did she actually know? Had she been watching me outside of work? Was this some kind of setup? I didn't want to believe any of it, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just about a confused intern crossing a line. There was something more, something darker, hidden beneath her nervous smile and the rain dripping from her coat. And the worst part? I could feel that whatever was about to come next, it wouldn't be easy to walk away from. I tried to stay calm, but my mind was spinning. The fact that she knew my wife's name, where I lived, and had shown up like this, it was all too much. I asked her, quietly but firmly, what was going on. She hesitated, then finally said, "I think your wife knows about us." I stood there, stunned. Us? There was no us. At least, not in the way she was making it sound. Yes, we had shared a few personal conversations at work, maybe got too comfortable, but there was never anything more. Never a line crossed. But hearing her say it like it was a fact, it hit me hard. I could feel the floor beneath me shift. Was she imagining something that never happened? Or worse, had I unintentionally given her the wrong idea? That maybe, in the middle of my emotional distance at home and late nights at the office, I'd blurred the lines more than I realized. My heart pounded with fear, not just of what she might say next, but of what my wife might already believe. And that's when another layer of the mess started to show. A few days earlier, I remembered my wife had asked casually about the new intern. Nothing accusatory, just a normal question. Is she working out okay? At the time, I didn't think much of it. But now, it echoed in my head like a warning I missed. Had she already suspected something? Was she watching me more closely than I realized? The intern's story kept twisting. She started mentioning little things she'd noticed, how my wife would call during work hours and how I'd step out to take the call. How she once saw my wife's photo on my desk, then noticed it was gone a few days later. Things I never paid attention to. She wasn't just watching me, she had been putting together a version of our lives, and in her version, she had a place in it. Meanwhile, I was still struggling at home. My wife had been distant, quieter than usual. We barely spoke about anything meaningful, and every time I tried, she brushed it off. I kept telling myself it was just stress. But maybe she was holding in something she already knew, or thought she knew. And now this intern had walked into our lives like a storm we never saw coming, pulling at threads we'd been ignoring for too long. And the storm wasn't over yet. She stood there in my living room, still wet from the rain, still trembling. I was trying to process everything, trying to find a way to fix it all before it fell apart, but the weight of it was too much. My wife was just upstairs, and at any moment, she could walk down and see what looked like exactly what it wasn't, something it never should have become. I asked the intern again, quietly but firmly, why she came here. What exactly did she want from me? Her eyes welled up. She said she thought she was in trouble. That someone was following her. That she felt unsafe. But then she added something strange, "I think your wife's behind it." Those words hit differently. It didn't make sense, none of it did. My wife was not the kind of person to play games or create drama. But lately, she had been acting distant. Secretive, even. Her mood changed quickly, and sometimes she'd look at me like she was trying to read my thoughts. Now I couldn't tell if I'd been blind to everything, or if someone was trying to manipulate me. At work, things had also started to shift. A colleague pulled me aside just days before and said, "Be careful with the intern. She's been asking around about your personal life." I'd laughed it off, said it was probably nothing. But now, it didn't feel like nothing. Now it felt like I was being pulled into something deeper, something I couldn't control. I couldn't figure out who to trust. My wife was keeping things from me. The intern clearly had her own version of the truth. And I was stuck in the middle, trying to hold together a life that was slowly unraveling. I kept going over every conversation I'd had with both of them, trying to spot the moment where it all started to go wrong. The tension was unbearable. I walked the intern to the door, told her she needed to leave. She hesitated, then whispered, "You'll see. She's not who you think she is." And then she was gone, disappearing into the rain just as suddenly as she'd come. I stood there, drenched in confusion, heart racing, mind spiraling. And then, from behind me, I heard a voice. It was my wife. Quiet. Calm. Like she had been listening the whole time. "We need to talk." I turned around slowly, my chest tight. My wife stood at the foot of the stairs, arms crossed, face unreadable. There was no yelling, no accusations, just a calmness that somehow felt more dangerous than anything she could have screamed. She looked at the door where the intern had just walked out, then back at me with a kind of quiet certainty that made my stomach twist. "I've known for a while," she said. "Not just about her, but everything else too." My mind started racing. Everything else? What did that mean? I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. She motioned toward the kitchen and walked in without waiting for me to follow. I trailed behind her, trying to keep my thoughts together. The silence between us felt heavier than any words could be. She poured herself a glass of water, took a slow sip, and then said, "She's not just your intern." I blinked. "What are you talking about?" She set the glass down carefully, then looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "She reached out to me. Weeks ago." That stopped me cold. "What?" "She sent me a message," my wife said. "On Instagram. Said she was worried about you. That she didn't think you were okay." At first I ignored it. Thought maybe it was a scam or someone trying to cause problems. But then she sent me screenshots. Messages you'd sent her. Notes she claimed were from you. She made it sound like the two of you were emotionally involved. That maybe more had happened. I shook my head. "That's not true." I know," she said, cutting me off. I didn't believe her. Not fully. But I also couldn't ignore it. That's why I started watching. Listening. So that's why she'd been distant. Cold. She wasn't just pulling away, she was observing. Gathering pieces. Trying to decide if she still trusted me. But it wasn't just that. There was something else in her voice, something I hadn't noticed before. Not just hurt, but fear. Then she dropped the second bombshell. She told me someone's been following her. Said she thought it was me. But the thing is, I have seen someone near our house. More than once. A car parked across the street at night. Lights off. Same car every time. I thought it was just my imagination, but now, her voice trailed off. I stepped back, heart racing. This wasn't just about infidelity or misunderstandings anymore. Something else was going on. Something deeper. More dangerous. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, her phone lit up on the counter. A new message. From an unknown number. All it said was, "You should have listened to me. Now it's too late." We both stared at it, frozen. Neither of us spoke. Because now, whatever game had started, it was no longer in our hands. My wife and I stared at the message like it was a ticking bomb. The words were simple, but the meaning was heavy. "You should have listened to me. Now it's too late." My hands were shaking as I picked up her phone and read it again, trying to make sense of what we were caught in. Whoever sent it knew both of us. And they weren't just playing games anymore, they were making a threat. We tried to trace the number, but it was blocked. No name, no ID. Just the cold message hanging over us like a shadow. That night, we didn't sleep. We kept checking the windows, locking every door twice. Even though we hadn't done anything wrong, at least not in the way people would assume, we still felt guilty, exposed. Like our lives had been cracked open. The next day, I called in sick. I needed answers. I needed to see her, the intern, and figure out what this was all really about. I went to the office, but she didn't show up. Her desk was empty. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Something didn't feel right. So I checked with HR. That's when the final pieces started falling into place. She wasn't who she said she was. Her records were real, but only just enough to pass a basic check. Her college, her address, even her emergency contact info, it was all vague, barely verifiable. HR said she'd been recommended by a third-party hiring agency, one we'd only used once before. And that agency? Shut down 2 weeks after she was hired. No trace left. I drove straight to the police station. I told them everything. Not just about her showing up at my house, but about the message, the stalking, the fake profile. They listened, took notes, said they'd look into it. But there was a strange look in the officer's eyes, one that said this wasn't new to them. Later that evening, my wife found something in our mailbox. No stamp, no name. Just a small brown envelope. Inside was a single photo. Me. Sitting in my office. Smiling. Talking to her. The intern. The angle was high, like from a vent or a corner camera. On the back, written in blue ink, were 6 words, "You were always being watched." And here's the twist no one saw coming, neither of us knew this yet, but a similar envelope had been sent to my boss. And another, to my wife's employer. Carefully chosen photos. Selectively edited messages. Fragments that could paint a very different story if seen out of context. This wasn't just a case of infatuation or misunderstanding. It was a setup, one that had been carefully planned from the beginning. The intern wasn't after me, she was after both of us. And as we looked at each other, finally starting to understand just how deep this went, one thing became clear: our lives weren't being pulled apart by an affair. They were being controlled by someone who had been watching all along. In the weeks that followed, everything slowed down, but nothing felt normal. The police opened a formal investigation, and we handed over everything: texts, screenshots, the photo, the envelope, even security footage from the office building. They confirmed what we feared: our intern wasn't even her real name. Her ID was forged, and her online presence was practically non-existent. She had created a false identity, embedded herself into our lives, and disappeared just as fast. No one could say exactly why. Maybe it was obsession. Maybe it was revenge. Maybe we were part of something bigger she had done before or would do again. But one thing was clear: she had studied us. She knew when we were vulnerable. She saw the cracks in our marriage and used them as entry points. She didn't need to physically harm us. She broke our peace of mind, our sense of safety, and left us questioning everyone and everything. But strange as it sounds, the chaos forced my wife and me to face what we'd been avoiding for too long. The distance between us, the lack of communication, the slow drifting apart, it didn't start with the intern. She just exposed it. We began having real conversations again. Hard ones. Honest ones. And through those talks, we found our way back to something we hadn't had in a while: trust. Not the blind kind, but the kind built slowly after everything's been shaken. At work, I was cleared of any misconduct. My boss understood the situation after reviewing everything, though the whispers didn't stop overnight. People love drama, and office gossip is a fire that spreads fast. But I kept my head down, stayed professional, and over time, the noise faded. The final loose end came quietly. A package arrived one afternoon, no return address. Inside was a flash drive. Just one file, a video of her, the intern, speaking directly to the camera. Calm, composed. "I didn't do this to hurt you," she said. "I wanted to show you what happens when people stop seeing each other, really seeing each other. You both forgot how to look, how to care. I reminded you." It was disturbing, but strangely accurate. And it made me realize something important: sometimes the real threat isn't what walks through your front door. It's what we ignore behind it. The slow silences. The conversations we avoid. The assumptions we make instead of asking questions. After that day, we never heard from her again. No more messages. No more envelopes. Just silence. But it wasn't the kind that scares you. It was the kind that lets you breathe again. So if there's anything I've learned from this, it's that safety isn't just about locked doors or blocked numbers. It's about truth. About staying close even when things get hard. Because once you stop paying attention, even something small, like a new intern, can change everything. 27.